Good evening, everyone. It's on or about 6:30 on this Valentine's Day evening, and I'll call this meeting to order by recognizing the traditional keepers of this land, and specifically our neighbors of the Alderville First Nation with a formal territorial acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the municipality of Brighton is located on the Mississauga-Anishinaabe territory and is the traditional territory of the Mississauga. The Council of the Municipality of Brighton respectfully acknowledges that the Mississauga Nation are collective stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. I will also advise that due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting will be held using various formats. Some members of council and some staff are joining us here in the chambers. Other staff members and members of council are engaging in the meeting via electronic conference technology. The public is invited to join us by viewing this meeting live on the Municipality of Brighton YouTube channel. We do have an addition to tonight's meeting with a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc. The council amend the February 14th, 2022 planning meeting agenda to add a report under section 5.1, which is the statutory public meeting. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? The motion's carried. And again, because we do have two members of council joining us electronically, I will pause after I call the vote because there is a bit of a delay between us and the Zoom meeting. So motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Connect, that council approve the February 14th, 2022 planning meeting agenda as amended. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof. There are none noted. We have no delegations this evening, which takes us to our statutory public meeting. The Municipality of Brighton takes steps beyond the requirements of the Planning Act to engage the community in land use planning initiatives. The municipality also holds a statutory public meeting on the planning application and then receive a staff report with a recommendation on which council will make a decision. After council has made our decision, any person or public body may appeal council's decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal as long as they have made an oral submission at this meeting or provided comments in writing to the clerk's office and requested notice of the decision from the clerk's office. This is also true of any person or public body that wishes to participate in the appeal. For details or information on appealing decisions of council, please visit the municipal website or contact the clerk's office. I have a motion moved by Councillor LeBlanc, seconded by Councillor Rowley, that council move into the statutory public meeting, February 14th, 2022 at 6:33 p.m. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. We have one item in our statutory public meeting this evening. It is with regard to rezoning application file number Z01-2022. The applicant is Stephen Orr. The location is 1276 Stony Point Road. The purpose of the public meeting is to request a decision from council on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to the Municipality of Brighton Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 140/2002 as amended. Mr. Walsh, by what method and on what date was notice of the zoning bylaw amendment application given?
Mayor to council, notice of the zoning bylaw amendment application was sent by regular mail on January 21st, 2022 to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property. Notice was also circulated to all the agencies as required under the Planning Act. In addition, a signed notice was posted on the property.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And would you please explain the purpose and reason for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment?
The purpose of the application is to rezone the subject property in order to fulfill a condition of consent for applications B01-2021 and B02-2021. The zoning bylaw amendment would serve to rezone both the severed parcels of those two applications from the rural exception number 1 zone and flood-prone area zone to a special residential exception holding zone and an environmental protection zone in order to appropriately address issues identified during the consent decision process, including reduced lot sizes, associated permitted uses, the natural heritage features on the property. A holding provision is intended to be applied to both severed parcels to ensure a development agreement addresses restrictions and recommended mitigation measures through an agreement that will be registered on title. Those restrictive issues are setbacks from the railway primarily, and issues dealing with natural heritage management.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Are there persons present or coming in virtually who have questions or comments regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment? Madam Clerk, are you aware of anyone joining us for that purpose? Thank you. And I see Mr. Orr is with us. Do you have any comments, Mr. Orr? I see you shaking your head. Are you good? Give me a thumbs up if you're good. All right. There you go. Are there any questions or comments regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment from members of council? Councillor LeBlanc.
To you, Chair, Mayor. I'm in favor of this, but when this first came to us, I've just read this the first time tonight. I don't remember in the last application where there was a setback of 75 meters from the railroad, and there was a required for noise study at 500 meters. Are these new things that have just been brought in, Mr. Walsh?
To the mayor to to the mayor to council. So no, these aren't new things. These there was a noise and vibration report submitted by Coulter, J.E. Coulter, as part of a complete application for the consents. That study was triggered through existing official plan policies, and those official plan policies reflect the Ministry of Environment's land use compatibility guidelines associated with railways. And the Coulter report concluded that provided the buildings were constructed in an appropriate fashion, such as bedrooms on the opposite side of the house than the railway source of noise, and that provided the house was situated a minimum of 75 meters away from the railway, that a vibration study was not required. And this is in keeping with MOE guidelines.
As a supplementary?
Yep, just supplementary, yes. To your Chair, for the 75 meters. So what you said, I got into your answer that you said for vibration. So you can build closer to the railroad than 75 meters if you can do a study that shows that you won't have an environment, a vibration going through your thing and pre-engineer and design. Because what I was thinking is that the other dwellings that are in Brighton that are way closer than that 75 meters. So.
To the mayor, that's correct. You can, for clarification, yes, you can construct closer than 75 meters if supported through a vibration study, so that the footings and foundations are engineered to account for that anticipated degree and frequency of vibration.
Thank you very much for the explanation.
Thank you both. Any other questions or comments from members of council? Mr. Walsh, do you have any final comments?
Mayor to council, the only final comment is that staff are recommending that we hear any comments tonight on the information as presented or as applied for through the notice, and then staff will bring back a recommendation report at the March Planning Council session.
So the motion before me is to essentially accept the report and direct staff to bring forward a report at the March 14th meeting, and it's moved by Deputy Mayor Connect, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc, that the staff report pertaining to zoning bylaw amendment file number Z01 2022 1276 Stony Point Road, Steve Orr, be received, and that Council of the Municipality of Brighton receive public comments in response to the public notice given dated January 21st, 2022, and that staff provide council planning at its session of the March 14th, 2022, a recommendation report pertaining to application for zoning bylaw amendment Z01 2022 reflected of the public comments as may be received. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. And that is the only item in our statutory public meeting. I have a motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Connect, that council move out of the statutory public meeting February 14th, 2022 at 6:40 PM. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. That brings us to planning and development reports. The first report is with regard to application for site plan approval. Xplornet Communications Incorporated, Concession 5, Part Lot 28, Part 1 on 39R 11504, 33 Grosjean Road. Ms. Deck, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, can you all hear me okay?
We can.
Perfect. So the municipality did receive comments from Northumberland County following the submission of the report to council regarding the requirement of a setback permit. So planning staff will be amending the agreement to include the provision of the requirement of the setback permit prior to the mayor's signature and council's approval. So I just wanted to update council on that matter.
That is not included in the motion, Ms. Deck?
No, that is not. We received that information after submitting the council report.
But staff will include it in the agreement. It's not required in the motion?
No.
Yes and no, right?
Yes and no, exactly.
Anything further, Ms. Deck?
No, that's all, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Deputy Mayor Connect, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc, that council receives the staff report regarding application, regarding application for site plan approval, file number SP01 2021 under the name Xplornet Communications pertaining to Part 1 on 39R 11504. And further, that council resolves to hereby grant site plan approval under Section 41 of the Planning Act, subject to the following conditions being met prior to the municipal signatures and the registration of the site plan control agreement. That if required, the property owner convey by way of deed of transfer to the satisfaction of the municipality of Brighton the following: a strip of land ensuring a minimum of 10 meters from the center line of Grosjean Road along the frontage of the property, and a site triangle at the intersection of County Road 41 and Grosjean Road. That if required, the property owner convey by way of deed of transfer to the satisfaction of the County of Northumberland the following: a strip of land for road widening purposes, ensuring a minimum distance from the center line of County Road 41 along the frontage of the parcel, and a site triangle at the intersection of County Road 41 and Grosjean Road. That the construction estimate be updated accordingly, and that the grading and drainage plan be updated accordingly. And further, that if required, prior to the mayor's signature, the municipal solicitor and the director of planning and development be authorized to make minor revisions to the authorizing bylaw as may be necessary to address refinement of the attached schedules or to reflect legal descriptions, etc. And further, that the municipal solicitor be directed to register the bylaw at the Northumberland County Registry Office and have the authority to revise the bylaw so far as necessary for the purposes of registration. Is there any discussion? Councillor Rowley.
Yes, just a question regarding the piece of property. I'm just looking at the key map that we have with this. It's my understanding that within that piece of property, there is already a residential home. Will this interfere with that home as far as, maybe driveway or just property differences there? It doesn't show the house on here, but I'm guessing that there is a house in there, correct? And I'm just wondering if there's any effect to those people in that home.
Right. Ms. Deck or Mr. Walsh?
Yes, there is a house there, and in the course of laying out civic addresses, there will be a separate address applied to each place of significant human activity, one being the house and the second place being the telecommunications tower. It is one long driveway, and we will be looking at some of those details in the course of executing the subdivision agreement, seeing what kind of final lot grading and drainage is in place, and some of the grading of the driveway and things like that, making sure that it's adequate. So in terms of actual interference between the home and the telecommunications tower, there's generally good separation, but you know, the telecommunication tower is further beyond the house. So, you know, other than the period of construction, there won't be too much activity of people going in, a little bit of maintenance, but it won't be any heavy trucks after it's been constructed. So we don't anticipate any conflicts, and being on the same property, there is some control of the owner through the agreement that the owner has with Xplornet. So we don't anticipate any major obstacles in that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything further from members of council? Those in favor? Any opposed? The motion's carried. It takes us to a report with regard to the assumption for public use of roads and all related above and below ground services and utilities, Rosslyn Estates Subdivision Phase 2A. Ms. Deck, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Not at this time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor LeBlanc, seconded by Councillor Rowley, that council receives the staff report regarding the assumption for public use of roads and all related above and below ground services and utilities for Rosslyn Estates Subdivision Phase 2A. And further, that council enacts a bylaw to assume for public use all related above and below ground services and utilities, including water and sanitary service laterals, specifically identified in Registered Plan 39M920 being Phase 2A of Rosslyn Estates Subdivision, in accordance with the letter from the municipal solicitor dated January 28th, 2022. And further, that the current securities held in accordance with the Rosslyn Estates Phase 2A subdivision agreement be released, subject to a holdback of $5,000 to ensure the completion of the repair of one service lateral connection, following which the balance will be released. And further, that if required prior to the mayor's signature, the municipal solicitor and the director of planning and development be authorized to make minor revisions to the assumption bylaw as may be necessary to address refinement of attached schedules or to reflect legal descriptions, block numbers, etc. And further, that the municipal solicitor be directed to register the assumption bylaw at the Northumberland County Registry Office and have the authority to revise the bylaw so far as necessary for the purposes of registration. Is there any discussion? Although, Councillor Bateman.
Thank you, Mayor. For the Director of Planning, just so I can wrap my head around it, for anybody else that may be wondering, if I skip ahead to the next section, it shows the assumptions. This is actually in Rosslyn 2A, and Phase 1 is from 2008. Will Phase 1 be coming up? And I know on the list it says there was some deficiencies, so they caught up because we're approving Phase 2A, and the other one is 10 years prior to that. So I was just wondering.
Mr. Walsh, any comment?
Sure. Through the mayor to council, to Councilor Bateman. There, we met with the proponent of the subdivision in December to go over some deficiencies. So some of these things are still outstanding, particularly some laterals that were originally cambered, but the recent camera work shows that it's still not in compliance. There's some camera work that didn't revisit some of the originally identified deficiencies. So we've had that conversation with the proponent and his engineer, and we're making arrangements to have more camera work done before we can move towards assumption. So some laterals, and there's a stormwater management system on site as well, referred to as Storm Tech, and there's different chambers associated with it, and some of the lateral chambers hadn't been cambered. And I invite the planner one, if there's anything more I should be adding to that she might have some additional details there, but maybe not.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Yeah, Paul outlined it quite well. We are working with the proponent and the developer's engineer on working towards assumption of Phase 1. There are some deficiencies still outstanding, but we have had communication with both the proponent and the developer's engineer to get that one moving and back to council for assumption, hopefully in the near future.
that satisfy your question, Councillor Bateman?
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowley?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to kind of add to that, you speak of camera work needing to be done. Who gets that bill?
I'm going to suggest the developer pays for it. Ms. Deck, Mr. Walsh?
Through the mayor, that's correct. There is sufficient securities on deposit, and in our communications with the proponent, there's some general acceptance to the idea that we'll just simply, instead of asking for him to undergo that additional cost of having additional camera work done, that we can utilize some of the security on hand, and the municipality will take maybe more of a lead role in contracting Quinny Sewer or other contractor that we may have active on our behalf in other places, that we can get them involved at the same time, and I think that would all in all save somebody a few dollars, and we can make sure that it meets the specifications of the municipality at the same time. And the proponent seems to be in agreement with that. We are going to get a quote from that municipal contractor and share that with the subdivision developer and make sure that he's on side with that amount before we commence with that work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Any other questions or comments from members of council? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Brings us to a report with regard to subdivision assumption status. Ms. Deck, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Not at this time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Motion before me is moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc. The council received the staff report regarding subdivision assumption status as information. Questions or comments from members of council? Councillor LeBlanc.
Through you, Mayor. When you look at the chart, you give us a drawing on one of the roads that still hasn't been assumed, one subdivisions, and I believe it's right by the bay or just north of Raglan Street. But the other ones, and some of them, the dates are 2006, 2008, 2008, 2008, and some of them, the credit has been expired. We're asking for legal. How long do we wait after some division is complete before we assume it? Or is it the developer that comes forward and asks for it? Or do we leave the residents with the deficiencies?
Ms. Deck.
Through you, Mayor, to council. Yes, so it's the developer and the developer's engineer responsibility to come forth as a request for assumption. They do have obviously a sometimes 1 or 2 year maintenance period that they have to wait until items are complete and all deficiencies are completed. And then they come forth to the municipality for us to start the assumption process. Sometimes that does take a long time. Going through deficiencies, there are a lot of items that need to be completed prior to bringing that forth to council. I do understand there are obviously some subdivisions that you have listed that date back quite some time. In regards to Presqu'île Place, that security was provided to the municipality and did have an expiration date that has expired. Currently, the municipality doesn't accept any or any letters of credit that do have expiry dates. Rosslyn Estates, the other one that was the registration year of 2008. Again, like I had previously spoken on, it is in the works for assumption to hopefully bring forth to council soon. And as well as the Clamp Investments Phase 3 is also in the process of moving forward. Just the one item block 36 is being converted to a residential lot. So I do understand that those items obviously have taken some time, but it is ultimately the developer and the developer's engineer, their responsibility to bring forth that request for assumption. And Paul, if you have anything to add, feel free to do so.
Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, I would just only add that we have talked to our solicitor to see if there's any risk to municipality in assuming it at this point. And because the municipality is busy plowing the street, et cetera, I think there's some expectation to assume it after this period of time. But we are just checking with the solicitor just to make sure that we have a thorough understanding before pulling that statutory trigger. In speaking with our sanitary operator, he's not aware of any recent real problems at all with that sanitary that was in there. It had a bit of a different design, but not uncommon. But other than maybe initially some laterals, again, which is not uncommon, we haven't had any major recent problems in there that he recalled offhand. So there doesn't seem to be any immediate obvious reason not to assume it. But I will be circling back again with some internal staff and our solicitor, and then having an answer, a full answer to that question through a staff report at a future time.
And just so I'm clear, it was mentioned that this particular subdivision, there was an expiry date on the letter of credit, but we do
That's
not,
correct.
we no longer accept letters of credit with expiry dates. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's important that when letters of credit are received, that they are in keeping with the form or template that is specified by the municipality. Banks don't always like to, give letters of credit because it does mean more administration by the bank. They do charge a fee to the proponent for basically maintenance of that letter of credit as well. That's why some developers are actually sometimes just depositing cash because it's a little bit cheaper for the developer if they can do it through cash. So we have to be mindful of the details on that form, that letter of credit form coming from the bank that is to the municipal specification. So it does not have an expiry date on it. And the options for redeeming that letter of credit has to be very clearly spelled out to be of the municipal prerogative.
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And just for clarification then, of the ones listed, there's only one that has expired, but staff don't see any issues with assuming that road. Is that correct?
That's correct. At this time, we are not aware of any particular obstacle to seeing it assumed.
Any other questions from members of council? Councillor LeBlanc.
Just one last, thank you, Mayor. So just as an example, not picking, let's say, Fox Den, 2008. So when would you accept the sanitary sewers and the storm sewers? If they haven't come forward for assumption, would you go back to 2008, or would you accept it as when they come forward for their accepted, for their done? And you say here there's asphalt deficiencies, and the asphalt deficiencies are still there. They're still very visible. So you mentioned that there's only a lot missing, but when do you accept the stormwater and the sanitary sewers? Do they have to be re-inspected? Were they inspected? And when does it trigger? Does it trigger for 2008, or is it trigger for 2022 or 23?
Ms. Deck?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor LeBlanc. So yes, so staff are aware that there are some asphalt deficiencies on Foxden. When we, myself and the manager of capital infrastructure, were actually specifically looking at block 36, we did note some asphalt deficiencies in front of that area. That may be resolved at time of the servicing connections for that lot, depending on any road cuts that may have to occur. However, any sort of asphalt deficiencies will be reviewed at time of assumption. I don't know the specifics on the site plan, or sorry, the subdivision agreement, as it was a little bit before my time. But if there are CCTV reviews that are supposed to be done prior to assumption, or if staff will just go ahead and do a CCTV review prior to assumption, that will likely be looked at time of the assumption brought forth after block 36 is completed. We will review that and the requirements outlined in the subdivision agreement at the assumption time. I hope that answers your question, Councillor LeBlanc.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any other questions from members of council? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. And now we move into planning report agreement for the provision of planning services. Director Walsh, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Nothing further to add, Mayor.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Connect, that the mayor and clerk be authorized to enter into an agreement with DM Wills Associates Limited for the purposes of providing planning services for a period of 1 year, as may be terminated earlier by either party, or may be extended as mutually agreed upon. Is there any discussion? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. So this is essentially to fill in the absence in the planning department. And so, and if that's the case, the idea is that as soon as we have someone else in place, that we won't have to carry on. We know that this is a costly way of filling in, but we know we also have no choice. So I just want to make sure on the timing of it.
Director Walsh?
Through the mayor to deputy mayor, that is correct. That this is to make sure we have resources in place so we can maintain a level of service while we search for a replacement manager of approvals. And after which, then the need for DM Wills will not be an issue. That the agreement will be requested to be terminated.
Thank you. Anything further from members of council? Councillor LeBlanc?
Through you, Chair, I have two questions. One is to you, the planner, is this a sole source contract? And two, when I look at the insurance, I know we're indemnified for 5,000, but it is a claims made insurance policy or an occurrence policy? Because one gives liability for 2 years, the other one gives liability forever. So which one is it? To protect it, I'm just looking for protecting the town and the taxpayers' dollars.
Director Walsh?
Yeah, I'll be asking DM Wills to provide the appropriate insurance for the level of liability that is expected in this type of service, and I can bounce it off the municipal solicitor just to make sure that council is confident in that regard. And to answer the first part of the question, it was a sole source. It was someone needed who was familiar with official plan and zoning bylaw. DM Wills has drafted it, and someone who was familiar with the geography of Brighton, which they are, and it was determined that no other vendor would be able to meet all those criterion, and it's essentially under a value that would support a sole source as well.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Bateman, is that your hand up? Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. The first comment is just a clerical thing. When you look at the agreement, it says on this day, February 7th. Will that have to be adjusted? I don't know if this was supposed to have come on the last meeting. I think it's what page it is, but it says at his meeting held on February 7th. So that would have to be changed. And the question I have is on number 22 of the agreement under confidential information. The consultant will not respond to any inquiries pertaining to any findings or agrees to refer all such inquiries to the municipality. Does that mean for any developments that will be funneled to or handled by DM Wills, if there's any members of the public which would typically call our planning department, they're to still call our planning department, and our planning department will get the answer from DM Wills for them in a timely fashion? Or how does that work?
Director Walsh?
From through the mayor to Councillor Bateman, it's a good question. Thank you for the typo catch, though. I appreciate that. That was originally slated for the February 7th meeting, you are correct. And we can make those revisions as appropriate. On the second part of the question about the confidentiality matter, that won't be invoked too often. Section 1.02, I believe, of the Planning Act says any information submitted in the course of a planning application is public information. At a consultation stage, we would like to try to keep it confidential, so we will need either the applicant's permission to forward on to our planning resources at DM Wills, or that yes, we will need to be the go-to for any exchange of opinion and research.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from members of council? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. That takes us to unfinished business, of which there is none reported on the agenda. Now we move into bylaws. The first bylaw is with regard to the application for site plan, specifically Xplornet. Moved by Deputy Mayor Connect, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date. Being a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute an agreement between the corporation of the municipality of Brighton and Xplornet Communications Incorporated regarding a telecommunications tower on the property located at Part Lot 28, Concession 5, being Part 1 on 39R 11504 in the municipality of Brighton in the county of Northumberland. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. The next bylaw is with regard to the assumption for public use of roads and all related above and below ground services, specifically Rosslyn Estates Subdivision Phase 2A. Moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Connect. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to assume for public use all related above and below ground services and utilities installed on registered plan 39M 920 being Phase 2A of the Rosslyn Estates subdivision. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Our third and final bylaw is with regard to planning services agreement with DM Wills Associates, and it's moved by Councillor LeBlanc, seconded by Deputy Mayor Connect. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute an agreement between DM Wills Associates Limited and the municipality of Brighton to provide planning services in accordance with the municipal policies and procedures and other government legislation, standards, and regulations. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. That brings us to question period. Madam Clerk, are you aware of anyone joining us for question period this evening? We have no in-camera session. So our confirmatory bylaw is moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Connect. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the corporation of the municipality of Brighton planning meeting held on February 14th, 2022. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. And a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor LeBlanc, that the February 14th, 2022 planning meeting adjourn at 7:08 p.m. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. Thank you everyone for joining us. For those of you who are here, drive safely home.